Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters around the world. My name's Owen Bennett-Jones from a very stormy North Wales, and I'm standing in tonight for Nicholas Wood, who is on business abroad, as you can imagine, and we're discussing today the midterms and Donald Trump. He is the master of all he surveys. No effective opposition in the Republicans, the Democrats, the bureaucracy, many foreign powers. And he is looking ahead now to the midterms, and we'll see what the next 3 years bring, which will partly depend on that election. And I'm joined by Malcolm Brown, who is Political Tour's US expert and the man who tells us what's going on in Washington, been there for many, many years, doing coverage for many of the foreign radio stations that have an interest in American politics, which is just about all foreign TV stations. So Malcolm, welcome to you.
Hi, Owen. Very pleasant afternoon here in Virginia, I can report, not like Wales.
Not like me, yes. You can probably hear the wind blowing through the windows. And, well, why don't we start? Because your tour is going to be just before the midterms, and you're starting off in New York, which at the moment is interesting because we've got this mayoral race that's on. I think the actual voting has begun today or maybe yesterday, and it's running through to the final day on November 4. So tell us who the candidates are and why it matters so much.
Well, the candidate who's getting all the attention is Zoran Mandani, who is a democratic socialist running as a member of the Democratic Party. He's up against Andrew Cuomo, who is a former governor of New York, who is running as an independent. And then the Republican candidate is a colorful individual, well known to New Yorkers and maybe some beyond, known as Curtis Sliwa, who is better known nationally and perhaps internationally for wearing a red beret on television a lot and for founding the Guardian Angels in New York, which was a sort of citizen security group that would patrol the streets and try and keep them safe. And so those are the candidates, and it's a race that's attracting a lot of attention for what it might say about national politics and also specifically what it says about the future direction of the Democratic Party.
And the reason Cuomo is standing as an independent is that he lost the primary within the Democratic Party to Mandani.
Yes, he was spanked in that vote pretty much, but decided to throw his hat in the ring and now has this odd alliance where the former mayor, a controversial figure in his own right, who was a Democrat, former police officer, Democrat, who cozied up to Donald Trump, had his own legal troubles, has now thrown his hat in the ring with Andrew Cuomo, despite having called him quite recently a liar and I think a snake, certainly something very uncomplimentary. But now in an effort to try and consolidate support around Cuomo, specifically in some areas of the city, he's thrown his hat in the ring into the Cuomo camp. So yes, very interesting race. Not the only thing that's going on, but we may get onto some of the other things. But yeah, this is an off-year election, so there are no Senate candidates, there are no House candidates. So there's a disproportionate level of interest in some of these other what would normally be smaller races. For instance, we've got gubernatorial, that great American word, races happening in Virginia and New Jersey. Those are going to be very closely watched for some of the same reasons about what they say about the Democratic Party. So my state, Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, who's a very moderate Democrat, centrist, with a national security background. She's running to be governor, stands a good chance. She's been ahead in the polls. Polls have tightened a bit, but again, she's the counterpoint to the Mandani race. She's the moderate, he's the radical, and the discussion is, okay, well, if both are ascendant, it probably doesn't advance the argument about where the Democrats go. But both races and New Jersey being very closely watched.
Yes, well, the Mandani is interesting because lots of people are saying it does show the future for the Democrats, and yet many people strongly disagree that that would work nationally. Just before we get on to what he actually stands for and why it might matter so much, can you just guide us as to roughly the average polls at the moment on those three candidates for New York mayor?
I haven't seen the most recent on Mandani, but I mean, clearly, even with the race narrowing to 3, he's still, even if Sliwa, who's come under pressure from Cuomo to drop out, because Cuomo making the case, I'm the credible candidate. The last poll I saw showed that even if you threw together those, if all Sliwa votes went to Cuomo, it still wouldn't be enough, was the headline. So pretty clearly ahead, and the world is clearly preparing itself for a Mandani mayoral ship, whatever that might mean.
Yeah, I mean, last time I saw it was 20 points. So yes, it's enormous. Right. So now then, he does have some quite radical positions. And that's why people are saying, look, this guy's taken off in New York. He's done a very effective campaign. He understands the attention economy. He does interviews whenever he's asked, constantly on the media, and it's worked. And he has staked out some radical positions which are winning all this support, which, so then the issue is, can you transfer that from New York to elsewhere? What are the positions that he is taking?
Well, affordability is his number one position, which is very resonant in a situation in which inflation hasn't come down much. It remains the top issue that's top of mind among most Americans. People, especially at a time when the government is shut down, in my part of the world, where you've got tens of thousands of federal workers, most of whom are not getting paychecks at this point. So affordability very much front of mind, and that's been his main message. He has also controversial positions on the Middle East. He's been described as an anti-Semite by some of his critics. He has tried to moderate that position somewhat, but he has a strongly anti-Israel government position. He has been, the anti-Semitism accusation comes from his past support for phrases like from the river to the sea, which is regarded as by Zionists and pro-Israelis and many American Jews as an anti-Semitic statement that doesn't allow for Israel's existence. So that's a very tricky one for him. That said, he's got, I think, around 20+% of Jewish support in New York. He's been courting some anti-Zionist Jewish groups. So he's obviously conscious of that. So that's been probably the most controversial position, but less controversial and probably more attractive to many, although his pro-Palestinian position is very popular with younger Democrats and younger voters, some of whom are new to the process in New York. That's clearly struck a chord. But he's also talked about free buses, about whether the city should be setting up grocery stores in so-called food deserts. So really focusing on those issues. But I think more than anything, he's resonating because he seems, in many respects, genuine. He seems to be talking to the concerns, the real life concerns that people have. And he's communicated extremely effectively. As you've said, he hasn't turned down any interviews. He's been on Fox News. He's seemingly not afraid to do that. He's quite eloquent. He's had some pretty eviscerating put downs during the mayoral debates. He's good on his feet, and literally good on his feet, because he's walked the length and breadth of the city, engaging with voters. He's a gifted communicator in social media. So regardless of his positions and whether or not he spells the future of the Democratic Party ideologically, he certainly represents the future of how to engage the electorate and how to communicate with the electorate in a way that the national leadership has so far failed to do.
Yeah, I mean, I heard some Democratic strategists on a podcast discussing him, saying, look, he's a brilliant candidate. He's just a brilliant candidate. But does that mean that his positions will work in, the rural America or in places that are more conservative? And, if you don't have a brilliant candidate who just can do this communication game very well, are those messages going to sound very different? And they could do, couldn't they?
Sure. And, there are many Republicans who are salivating at the prospect of a Mandani mayoralship because it's going to allow them to portray the future Democratic Party as rabid socialists, communists, anti-capitalists. And he does have a very close association with the Democratic Socialists of America, which until recently was a negligible political force in this country and still remains very much a minority. But I don't think people are attracted to him because they're not saying, "Oh, so this socialism thing, let's give it a go." They are attracted to making things more affordable. And, free buses sound good. Now, the rubber will meet the road when you have to pay for free buses and do some of the other things without chasing away all the capital and the financiers who make New York what it is and help to finance it. So that's going to be the challenge he faces if and when, it seems likely, he becomes the mayor.
Okay, well, that's something we should all be watching in the next 2 or 3 weeks as we see how that campaign climaxes in New York. But your main focus on your tour will be the midterms. And obviously, they are very, very important for America's future. I mean, you could really say these are massive elections because is Trump going to remain unrestrained or is he going to face a hostile House? That's basically the issue at stake. Now, well, first of all, why don't you, because I know the Democrats are worried that they are not further ahead. They don't have a clear national lead that would take them over the line in a number of swing states. What are the polls saying now?
Well, there's something I was just actually looking before we started talking. There are some interesting polls out there. For instance, who do people blame for the current shutdown? You would think with Republicans firmly in control of, well, pretty firmly in control, not so much in the House, but in control of the House, in control of the Senate, and evidently in control of the White House, that the blame would largely fall on Republicans. And that's clearly what Democrats have tried to do. But actually, only 50% of the national electorate holds Republicans most responsible for the shutdown, and 43% hold the Democrats responsible, which has obviously been the Republicans' main talking point. So that's not a great number for Democrats. And they remain, Congress generally remains appallingly unpopular, and Democratic leadership historically also very unpopular. So it's not a great base, and they are clearly worried about the leadership question. That said, they would expect off-year midterm elections, sorry, not off years, this year, next year, midterms. They typically favor, in a circumstance where one party controls all the levers of government, they typically favor the outsiders and the minority. So they would expect to do well, or certainly the conventional wisdom is they stand a pretty good chance of retaking the House. Senate, much less clear as to where that goes. And clearly the Republicans are concerned about that too, because there is more than usual conversation about the perennial topic of gerrymandering. And there's really some sort of nuclear moves going on around the country on both sides now about that. Started in Texas, where they talk about redistricting in ways that would clearly favor the Republicans. Then California, the sort of giant in the room, has now a proposition going before voters that would allow them to redistrict in a way that would be expected to add a number of Democratic seats. So Donald Trump is clearly concerned, and Republicans are clearly concerned, that Dems do have a good chance of retaking the House, and they're doing everything they can to try and stop that from happening.
This gerrymandering is super important. So let's just go into that before we get on to sort of the state of the parties, as it were. So, as you say, it started in Texas, and as I understand it, the attempt is to get more seats. You know, it's not just changing the boundaries to favor one party or another. It's actually creating new districts, which would produce more Republican congressmen in Texas, and then California hit back, saying they'll do it back in California in more Democratic seats. And then I read it's happening in North Carolina. How widespread is this?
Well, there's pressure from the national parties, certainly from Republicans, for it to happen elsewhere. We've seen some movement in Indiana. Dems have been somewhat in two minds about this. Sections of the party have been in favor of reforming the process in a way that took these decisions out of the hands of politicians, because obviously they're self-interested, and it leads to a perception that the process is corrupt and rigged by the very people who stand to benefit from it. That said, Democrats are also under huge pressure to take a more pugnacious stand in the face of what they see as gross interference, at best, by the White House. And the grassroots, many of the grassroots accuse the Democratic leadership of bringing a sort of a banana to a gunfight, and they need to sort of pick themselves up and take a more offensive stance. And whilst it's distasteful, but if the other side's doing it, why should we do unilateral disarmament is essentially the argument. And that's what Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is running with. Essentially, he's established a massive national profile, and he's close to being the de facto spokesperson for the party now in the country at large, even though he's just the governor of California. Not that that's a small job. He's taken this very overtly pugnacious stance, going and ribbing and ridiculing Donald Trump by issuing tweets and other social media in the style of Donald Trump, and that's got him a lot of attention and support. And yeah, he's staked his potential presidential candidacy on this Proposition 50 in California, which would allow the redistricting to take place, and it's expected would lead to a number of seats becoming Democrat, and as a counterbalance to what Republicans are attempting to do in the rest of the country. So it's hugely important events that are going to take place in this election cycle that will affect the midterms, basically.
And it hasn't happened yet. Is it certain, do you think, that it will happen, that we will get this redistricting, or not? Is it not certain?
It's not certain. I mean, the trouble with all of this is that, as we've said many times on these calls, the way that the electoral system works here, it's not a national system. So the way it pans out in California doesn't necessarily instruct us about what might happen in Indiana. You could expect all of these things go up to the state Supreme Courts, potentially. So, local challenges are going to take place all over the place, Texas, everywhere. So it's hard to tell. But what is clear is that the impulse is there from Republicans, and that there's a growing impetus from Democrats to try and counteract that in the same way, even if only temporarily. I mean, the argument basically being, look, we don't like this. It's distasteful, but I think, we can't disarm, like I said, unilaterally. We've got to do something to counteract this. And so at least in the meantime, pending this better future in which there are commissions or other non-partisan bodies that will actually make these redistricting decisions. So pending that, we've got to fight fire with fire. Yeah,
it's just interesting you made that point, that it will get challenged in the courts. So in fact, there'll be a limited time for this to happen, because I think it varies from state to state, but the decision on what's going to happen in the election would have to be taken 3 or 4 or even 6 months ahead of the election, in terms of which districts are going to be contested. So in fact, there'd only be about 6 months to get this done before the timetable would be, the clock is ticking, let's put it like that.
Right.
We've got lots of people online now, and just to say, as ever, we'd love to get you involved in this conversation. So please do raise a digital hand, make a comment in the Q&A or the chat or wherever, and we will reflect your question as we go along. Before we started, the comment was made, we must talk about the East Wing and the ballroom. Tell us about the East Wing and the ballroom.
Yeah, this sounds like a small sort of local planning affair, but I think I would make the case, and not just me, but others have made the case, that this is important in the sense that, well, just for new readers, let's be clear what we're talking about. Donald Trump has, in the space of a few days, totally demolished the East Wing of the White House, which is where the First Ladies have their offices. It's the sort of public entrance to the building. And he had said, and all of this to make way for this very grand, very large, increasingly large ballroom that he wants to build with private money and some of his money, he says. And the site, the White House is obviously revered by Americans. It's always referred to as the People's House. It was very specifically, when created, not meant to be a European-style royal palace. And that's not President Trump's aesthetic. He likes the palatial, as you can see from his Mar-a-Lago club and other buildings that he's been involved in. So it's a very shocking image to see this gaping hole on the side of the White House, which happened sort of without much pre-announcement. There's a big debate now whether or not it was even legal. I mean, it's done. So, I mean, that's a debate that's interesting, but academic at this point. There's a lot of discussion about whether what he builds will be in keeping with the house, whether its architecture has merit, and so on, and whether he's changing the nature of the entire building forever, which he clearly is. But what I would contend, it's a long way of saying, I would contend that as a visual metaphor, it's extremely potent. So on one level, who cares what the White House looks like? Apart from Americans care, but internationally, why do we care? Why does it matter politically? It's a really potent metaphor, I think, for the way he's run this presidency, where essentially he's just plowing on, doing what he wants to do, and sort of the rule makers and arbiters sort of follow in his wake, and the courts and so on. But he's plowing forward with great speed. And I do wonder whether this. I mean, we have said this probably about many things, but whether this is the thing that makes some Americans stop and think. The Americans who might previously have supported him and go, "Oh wow, this is maybe I didn't sign up for this." I don't know, but it's certainly a potent metaphor that his opponents can use to say, look, he's running roughshod through whether or not he's running roughshod through the law. He's certainly running roughshod through precedent and sort of things that presidents have done in the past. Yes, they have made changes, largely aesthetic, some bit more than that, to the White House, but no one has done this sort of root and branch reconstruction for, well over 100 years. So this is extraordinary, and it's provides this very striking image. They're probably still doing it. These big machines just pulling bits of the facade, and not just the facade. And it started people reporting the facade had gone, and then by I think the end of today or tomorrow, basically the whole East Wing will have gone. So
we all know what happened in the West Wing because we watched the TV program. So
right.
What happens in the East Wing before it was knocked down?
The First Lady has her offices there. I think the Social Secretary has an office there. So it's not the beating heart of the White House necessarily, but it is a public-facing building. It is on top of a bunker. We don't know whether it's affected the bunker, but that's a bunker where, say, Dick Cheney, I think, was taken on 9/11. So it's a secure presidential facility. I would have to assume that's still there. Presumably no reason to knock it down. But the building that's going to replace all of this is, I'm not an architect, but it will dwarf the White House. Oh yeah, the price tag has gone up from 200. I think we started at 200 million. We're currently at 300 million, and the square footage has also expanded to something that's larger than the White House complex, or the main part of it, as it currently stands. So it's not an insubstantial feature. That said, many presidents have said they did need better entertaining space, and when they have these state dinners, typically they put them in a tent, which was not a perfect solution. I'm not sure that everybody was thinking about something quite this large or this grand.
Yes, I'm not sure that many ballrooms. I mean, it's not that complicated a thing to build. 300 million seems an awful lot.
Yes, you should be able to get a lot of ballroom for that. I think there's lots of gilt going in, probably. So.
I see. Yes, it'll be the interior decoration, maybe. Yeah. Well, okay. Again, if anyone's got a question, now would be a good time to make yourself heard or make yourself seen. Just tell us where the Supreme Court is. I mean, he's got the majority on the Supreme Court. And it seems to me the Supreme Court has been very nervous of confronting him. There are lots of reasons for that maybe they fear that they couldn't enforce a law if he ignored them, and that would leave them in a bad position. What's the current balance between the president and the court?
Well, the court is, certainly has issued lots of judgments that are seen as very friendly to the administration, particularly over the role of executive power. They clearly take the view that the president has, it's the most forward-leaning interpretation of presidential power that we've seen coming out of a Supreme Court, I think, and that's in line with the way that many of President Trump's inner cabinet and inner kitchen cabinet types see the role of the presidency. And the Supreme Court has been extremely generous in that regard. And the shadow docket, which are not these sort of formal rulings, has been used a lot in part a response just to the volume of really consequential decisions coming at the court. So the court has to find a way of at least holding, sort of making pending decisions. But yeah, it's been good for Donald Trump. Critics say that this is the culmination of decades of work. It's not just this administration. They say it's the result of decades of work by ultra conservatives behind the scenes to raise a cadre of conservative justices and then to put those in front of Donald Trump and then of course he got to make a number of extremely consequential Supreme Court picks during his first time in office, and now his critics would say he's reaping the dividends of all of that work by those conservatives and by his appointments.
So it's interesting to hear that, because you read from time to time, is the court going to take him on this one or on that one, or with these cases coming up? But you're giving me the impression, no, that they're pretty reliably supporting him.
I mean, that's the indication they've given to date based on their decisions. But of course, we should bear in mind they haven't made formal adjudications on some of the biggest stuff. It takes a long time for the wheels of justice to throw these things up to the top, and some of the time the court will bat them down to lower courts to try and resolve the issue. They don't always want to take it up, but the stuff that has risen to the court's attention and merited a full judgment has largely gone his way.
Looking ahead to the midterms, it is possible that when people are there will be enormous No Kings protests. I mean, that must be a possibility in the run-up to the election. Millions apparently turned out on the last one. How important are they? What are they saying? Are they effective? Are they changing anyone's mind? What are they doing?
I mean, there were millions of people on the street, and I think that is potent. They're not certainly Republican efforts to portray them all as dangerous radicals, proto-communists, didn't really jive with the reality of what we saw. There were few, if any, arrests that I'm aware of, certainly no mass arrests based on the most recent demonstrations. I mean, you could argue that they're somewhat susceptible to being pigeonholed more as sort of hand-wringing, NPR, National Public Radio listeners, just bleating. That would be a more accurate put down probably than the raging radicals and anarchists, bomb throwers that the Republican establishment was trying to portray them as. But it is, I think, important when you see millions of people taking the streets, peaceful demonstrations, many of them using humor to poke fun at Trump in particular. I went to observe at a local one near me. It's a very small town, and there were about 200 people standing on either side of the road with signs and waving at drivers going through, a good bunch of whom honked their support. A few of them flipped the bird. Probably more honking. I saw more out-of-state number plates honking, probably, anecdotally, I would say, than local. And you could sort of tell from the vehicles driving past. There was a good parlor game to be had about which car would honk and which car wouldn't. The diesel pickups did not seem to be a natural constituency from my observations. But it's powerful when 7 million people plus, whatever it was, certainly hundreds of thousands for sure, millions most likely, decide to spend a portion of their weekend protesting, because they indicate typically the tip of an iceberg. For all of them, there are a number of people who feel aggrieved but stay at home, and so that's a lot of people.
And it's interesting which message they chose to center it on, the executive power argument. Now, Joyce, could you be promoted? We'd like to hear your question from you, if you're willing to do that, or else I can read it out. Yes, Joyce, why don't you unmute yourself and tell us what you'd like to know? So I will ask Joyce's question because you're still muted there, it looks like to me. So she is asking, Nancy Pelosi is still involved in the politics in California, but there's a candidate, I think, reportedly campaigning there and studiously avoiding any mention of Pelosi. Is Nancy Pelosi expected to play any role for the Democrats in the midterms?
Well, she is widely still revered within the party as she was an extremely effective speaker and is regarded as someone who has very good political antenna and instincts, and she knows how to operate and the whole machinery of politics and of Congress. She is, clearly a singular talent. That said, at the same time, Democrats are facing a internal struggle about the gerontocracy that leads the party, and there is definite appetite for a younger generation of leadership, and that's clearly not her.
That's Mandani in New York, isn't it?
That's more Mandani, yeah. So I would expect her to be, people. I'm sure and she's smart enough and savvy enough to know that that's likely to be the case. I mean, she was smart enough to put the knife into Biden just before he formally stood down, because she could see what was going on, and I think she understood that his age and apparently diminished capacity was a major problem. And as far as I know, she and Biden have not spoken since. But the party as a whole is looking around for younger leaders. So, and I suspect she's smart enough to be able to play a role behind the scenes, but she's also a lightning rod for Republicans. So again, conscious of that, I suspect she might be more inclined to play a behind-the-scenes role, unless it's in California specifically, which is a slightly different affair. But certainly she's not going to play any better now than she did in larger other sections of the country.
I'm going to ask you about your tour in a moment, but just before then, I do want to, you mentioned the shutdown earlier, and just seems to be one important issue to get into, which is the Democrats are focusing their efforts on insisting that the increase in health insurance premiums do not go up to the massive extent, 400% in some cases, that they're due to go up around about now. People getting letters around about now saying your premium's gone up by X%. The irony of the situation is, if the Democrats succeed in that, they'll be helping the Republicans not lose votes on this account. Can you just talk us through that dilemma that the Republicans have grappled with and why they've settled on asking for something that arguably may help their opponents?
Well, there is a debate slightly within some Democrats have made the case cynically that, in a way, politically, you'd be better off just to let the premiums go up, and so pass the continuing resolution, which essentially is a way of saying you pass the budget as it currently is, the status quo, you allow government to reopen, and let the insurance premiums rise on the basis that the pain that would cause cause a huge revolt and revulsion and concern, and most of that would be directed at Republicans who don't still have a replacement plan. They're very critical still of Obamacare, but they don't really have a cogent plan that the world has seen to replace it. So that said, other Democrats say, look, we're not the party who allows this to happen to ordinary Americans, and we've got to do something. And also, they would argue politically, this is good ground for us. So I think all of this is going to come to a head. That the shutdown to this point, I mean, I know when people overseas might think, oh, government shutdown, how on earth does the world operate? Well, you drive around, life doesn't look that different if you're not a government worker. Yes, some flights have been delayed and that kind of thing, but it's not like people are standing around in the streets, tapping their watches, saying, when's the government going to reopen? It's a big conversation, especially around this part of the world where I am, the DMV, as they call it, so Maryland, Virginia, and the district itself, District of Columbia, where hundreds of thousands of people have been sent home, and many of them are not receiving paychecks. And so food banks are experiencing greater demand. And I met someone yesterday who relies on food stamps, which is essentially, government food vouchers. And there's huge concern, not just because they are unlikely to be able to get them as things currently stand, but also the supermarkets that rely on the income from the food stamps will be affected and so on. So some of the knock-on effects are coming, but these so the deadline really for these notices to go out is the end of the month, and I think that's when really the impetus for a kind of a resolution really becomes acute, and you're likely to see more dramatic movement. I can't see either party maintaining its position for very long after that. I mean, something has to give. Right now, it's a game of chicken. The Republicans are still out. Which isn't a great look. They're portrayed by Democrats as being on holiday, on vacation. And they're certainly not in Washington dealing with this. They've said, look, Democrats could help us pass the continuing resolution, i.e. reopen the government. All we need is a number of Democrats in the Senate, a handful, to come over to our side. We can get the government open. Then let's have this discussion about healthcare, if you want to have it. But let's open the government first. So I think the pain points really are going to start getting much more acute very soon, and that will hopefully give rise to some movement. But it's no one's blinked yet.
The tour, what can people expect?
The tour, well, we are going to start in New York, and it's mainly going to be New York focused. So we will see, most likely, potentially, depending on what the good people of New York decide, we will see what year one of 1 year of a Mandani mayoralship means for the state and how that has affected the Democratic Party. It also gives us a chance to dive into some of the international components, obviously New York being the home of the United Nations, where Donald Trump has made such a play on the international stage, which has generated actually some criticism within his own party, who say at a time when he had said so much about making life affordable and so on, it's admirable, and he's received praise from even some staunch Democrats for the progress in the Middle East. But at a time when he's spending so much time talking about Ukraine and the Middle East, Americans are still hurting. So there's been some grousing from within his own party about that. But we'll be able to tap into where the international community, how that's playing, how the Trump administration is regarded, and looking at some of the constituencies in New York that are potent and powerful on the international and swayed by international affairs. So it's a bit of US domestic politics and some international focus as well, more than usual.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Sounds brilliant. And I know that if people are interested in seeing the midterms, it is worth putting yourself on the wait list if there's only a wait list available, because other tours may be arranged if there's enough interest. So it's definitely worth expressing an interest. And let's just look ahead now. Malcolm, thank you.